Hey, it's Tay from Taymations, and in this video, I'm going to experiment with different methods of preserving and repurposing frame slices from my Strata-Cut animations. If you've watched my channel before, you've probably seen my Strata-Cut animations where I slice up a pre-built block of clay that I like to call a time sculpture to reveal an animation that was built inside of it. Also, if you're curious about Strata-Cut as an animation technique, check out this video from my channel that goes deeper into it. Or better yet, go to Strata-Cut.com and learn it from the inventor himself, David Daniels. Now on to the video. In front of me, you'll see all of the supplies for these various experiments. Over here, I've got a variety of different brands of oven-baked clay and a big block of Van Aken plastilina clay, which is the Strata-Cut animator's choice of clay. More on that in a bit. And the idea behind this method is to find a ratio of oven bake and plastilina clay that would allow me to effectively build and animate a time sculpture as normal, but then bake the frame slices afterwards and preserve them that way. The second experiment is more of a repurposing of frame slices from my previous animations. And right here I've got clear pouring resin and a couple silicone coaster molds. And I want to see if I can put a frame slice in a mold, pour resin over it, and preserve the slice inside of a clear coaster. The third experiment is one that was actually shown to me by David Daniels himself, and it involves pressing the frame slices between two clear sheets of plastic, and then putting it in a picture frame and making a piece of wall art. Before I get started, why do I want to preserve these slices so badly? Well, other than having cool wall art and drink coasters, Strata-Cut animation goes through a lot of clay. Like, a lot. Here are 3 piles of frame slices from just 2 small blocks I animated. So you can see over time just how much clay I would go through. It would be way too difficult and time intensive to separate all the colors from these slices to reuse in my next block. So what I typically do is mix all the slices together into a dark gray. The issue with that is mixing these slices together is actually super time and effort intensive. And so I want to try to find creative ways to give these slices a new life and a new purpose. Let's hope I don't burn the garage down or die of resin poisoning before the end of this video, but regardless, I'll show you the whole process from start to finish and the final result, awful or not. See you on the other side. Now, the issue with this technique is going to be the plastilina clay. Plastilina clay has a low melting point. It becomes soft and malleable at body temperature. So you can imagine putting it into a toaster oven, it would just melt everywhere. And that's probably what's going to happen. I get suggestions in my comments sometimes that say, why don't you just make a block out of all oven-baked clay, and then when you slice it up and animate it, you can simply bake those slices afterwards. The issue with that is oven-baked clay is fairly expensive per ounce. It also doesn't really mold the same or hold its shape in the same way, and so when you're building a Strata-Cut block, it's a lot more difficult. Now remember, I mentioned that plastilina clay is the Strata-Cut animator's choice of clay. And the reason for that is it's fairly cheap per pound, it's oil-based so it doesn't harden, and it's easy to mold but also retains its shape well. Now I've gathered all these different brands of oven-baked clay to see what the differences between them are and if any of them will allow me to pull this off. We've got Crafter's Collection oven-baked clay, Sculpey III, Fimo Soft, Kato Polyclay, Liquid Sculpey oven-baked clay. I'll be going through each of these brands individually and doing a control and then a mixture of 20%, 40%, and 60% oven-baked clay to plastilina clay, rolling those out into thin sheets and baking them in this old toaster oven. Let's see what happens. right, so now I want to try the resin drink coaster method, and I want to make it a little more interesting. So instead of just putting one frame in the center of the coaster and pouring resin over it, I want to actually put 2 frames in each coaster here. If I take 2 slices here, one with the eyes closed, on the other side with the eyes open, in theory, once I pour resin over it, you should be able to flip the coaster like a little animation out of it. Eyes open, eyes closed. So one worry of mine is that plastilina clay, like I explained before, has a very low melting point. And from what I know about resin, it tends to heat up a little bit. And so part of me is worried that it will slightly melt and distort these faces a little bit as it's curing. I hope to not run into that issue, but we shall see. The only other potential issue I can see coming up from this is once these coasters are made, let's say everything goes exactly to plan, there is still plastilina clay inside that resin. And so if this coaster has like a hot drink on it, for example, that plastilina clay might slightly melt and distort inside the coaster. So anyway, let's get started on this experiment.
"48 hours later."
All right, so in summary, did these methods work and are they worth doing? And actually, yes. With method number 1, it seems that it is possible to preserve plastilina clay by baking if it's mixed with the right ratio of oven-baked clay. I found that a 40% mix of Fimo Soft oven-baked clay with a 60% mix of Van Aken plastilina provided the best balance of having the right consistency to build a Strata-Cut block before you bake it, and then also getting hard enough after baking to preserve it. The mixture of 40% liquid Sculpey to 60% Van Aken plastilina actually had the best preservation after baking. It basically turned into rubber, but it was pretty messy to work with and hard to mix, and the consistency after mix wasn't very conducive to building a Strata-Cut block. Therefore, for this purpose, it was a no-go. The downsides to this method are you have to do it outside or in a well-ventilated area because it smokes quite a bit and it smells really nasty. It's also a lot of work to mix the clay together, and you need need a scale to weigh out the ratios. It's unclear if different colors of oven bake and plastilina clay would affect these results and would just require more testing. So would I use this technique? In certain cases, actually, yeah. For example, baking the slices before pouring them into a resin mold, like I did with the coaster experiment in this video, would prevent that potential hot drink issue that I mentioned earlier. It would also just open up more options in general for repurposing, so I think this method is really good when used in tandem with other methods. Method 2 of resin pouring the slices into coaster molds worked shockingly well. I admit I probably should have watched a couple YouTube videos on resin pouring before attempting that, but hey, at Taymations, we take risks. And sometimes those risks don't pay off. One thing I would do differently though is to pour a little bit of resin in the mold, let that slightly cure, then put the Strata-Cut slice on and pour more resin over that. That way, I won't get those holes on the surface that expose the clay, and I'll have a nice clean surface to set a drink on. The third method of framing the slices was by far the most successful, and that should really be no surprise because David Daniels has been doing something similar to this since the 1980s. Mine is really just a simpler version of his, so if you want to see the David Daniels way, check out the link in the description. On my next one, I'd probably use a more interesting paper backdrop than just this white paper. Maybe like the paper used on the base from whatever animation the slices came from to tie it all together. Also, I'll be making coasters and frames from all my Strata-Cut animations going forward and dropping a limited number of those on my website for sale. If you want to own an official piece of Taymations animation and support me in my endeavor to do this full time, then keep an eye out for when I announce that those drop. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.